The radio telescope dish in Chile had been listening to the same patch of empty space for 6 months. Dr. Amanda Rivers rubbed her tired eyes and checked the data streams flowing across her computer screen. Most nights were like this. Endless, static punctuated by the occasional burst from a distant pulsar or the interference from a satellite. She had dedicated her life to finding proof that humanity was not alone in the universe, but after 15 years of searching, even she was beginning to doubt. The signal started as a whisper. At first, Amanda thought it was just another equipment malfunction. The pattern was too regular, too structured to be natural. But as she isolated the frequency and cleaned up the noise, her heart began to race. This was not random cosmic background radiation. This was intelligent. The transmission came in bursts of mathematical sequences, prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, basic geometric relationships, universal concepts that any intelligent species should recognize. But then something impossible happened. The signal shifted to what sounded like broken English. Hello? Hello? Anyone hear this? We need help. Please, if humans receive this message, we are dying. The destroyers came from the void. Our children are gone. Amanda's hands trembled as she recorded every word. The voice was strange, musical, with harmonics that suggested the speaker had more than one vocal cord. But the desperation was unmistakable in any language. We learned your speech from your broadcast. We know of Earth. We know humans make beautiful music and tell stories of hope. Please help us. We cannot fight them alone. Coordinates follow. The message repeated 3 times before fading into static. Amanda sat in stunned silence, staring at the scrolling data on her screen. After all these years of searching, First Contact had found her. Within 2 hours, every major government on Earth had a copy of the recording. The coordinates pointed to a star system nearly 40 light-years away, far beyond human reach with current technology. But the implications were staggering. Not only was there intelligent life in the universe, but it knew about humanity and was asking for help. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council lasted 18 hours. President Sarah Martinez of the United States argued for immediate action, while Chairman Liu Wei of China urged caution. The message could be a trap, he insisted. How could they trust aliens they had never met? But it was the Russian delegate who asked the question that changed everything. If we ignore this call for help, what does that say about humanity? The debate that followed split along unexpected lines. Military advisors warned that revealing Earth's location to unknown aliens could doom the human race. Scientists argued that this was the greatest opportunity in human history. Religious leaders grappled with the theological implications of non-human intelligence. In the end, it was Admiral Michael Stone who provided the deciding argument. The gruff naval officer had spent 30 years defending Earth's oceans and had no patience for philosophical debates. These beings reached across 40 light-years to ask for our help, he said, his weathered face grim. They're dying while we sit here arguing. If we have the power to help and choose not to, then we're not the species I thought we were. The vote was close. 7 in favor, 5 against, with 3 abstentions. Humanity would respond to the alien distress call. The crash program to build an interstellar fleet took 6 months. Earth's greatest minds worked around the clock to adapt. Existing fusion drive technology for deep space travel. The ships would need to carry everything they might need for a mission that could last years. Admiral Stone commanded the expedition from the bridge of the UES Valiant, humanity's first true warship designed for interstellar travel. 5 other ships accompanied him. 2 more destroyers, a heavy cruiser, a supply vessel, and a hospital ship. It was not much of a fleet by Earth standards, but it was everything humanity could spare. The night before departure, Dr. Rivers visited Admiral Stone in his quarters aboard the Valiant. She had volunteered for the mission as the fleet's xenobiologist, despite having no formal military training. "Are you sure about this, Admiral?" she asked. "We're flying blind into a situation we don't understand. These aliens could be leading us into a trap." Stone poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed her one. "Doctor, I've been a soldier for 30, Years. I've seen what humans do to each other when we think no one is watching, but I've also seen what we're capable of when we decide to do what's right, regardless of the cost. He walked to the porthole and looked out at the Earth spinning slowly below them. Those aliens chose to call us for help. Out of all the civilizations that might exist out there, they picked humanity. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe we're not the heroes they think we are. But we're what they've got. Dr. Rivers joined him at the window. What if we're walking into something we can't handle? Then we'll learn something about ourselves in the process, Stone replied. And maybe, just maybe, we'll prove that humanity deserves a place among the stars. The fleet departed Earth on a Tuesday morning, when most of the planet was still asleep. There were no parades or celebrations. Officially, the mission did not exist. Only a few hundred people knew that humanity had taken its first steps into the wider galaxy. As the blue marble of Earth faded into the distance behind them, the crew of 6 ships settled in for the long journey ahead. The alien coordinates were still transmitting their desperate plea for help, growing fainter with each passing day. Admiral Stone ordered the communications officer to monitor the frequency around the clock. "Sir," the young officer asked during the second week of their journey, "what if we're too late? What if there's nothing left when we get there?" Stone studied the star chart spread across his command table. 40 light years. Even at maximum burn, it would take them nearly 2 years to reach the alien system. Whatever was happening there would be long over by the time they arrived. "Then we'll bear witness," he said simply. "Someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to remember." But deep in his heart, Admiral Stone hoped they would find more than just empty space and debris. Humanity had finally received an invitation to join something greater than itself. He was determined not to waste it. The journey to the stars had begun. 2 years of interstellar travel had changed the crew of the human fleet. The men and women who arrived at the alien coordinates were harder, more focused than those who had left Earth. They had trained every day for a battle they might never fight, preparing for first contact with beings they could only imagine. Admiral Stone felt the familiar weight of command as the Valiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Around him, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their instruments scanning the star system that had called for help so long ago. What they found was a graveyard. Dozens of alien ships drifted in the void, their hulls torn open and bleeding, atmosphere into space. The vessels were unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Organic curves that seemed grown rather than built, with surfaces that shimmered like mother of pearl. They were beautiful even in death. "Life signs, sir," reported the sensor operator. "Faint, but there are survivors in 3 of the larger vessels." Stone nodded grimly. After 2 years of wondering if they were too late, at least some of the aliens had survived. "Signal the fleet. We go in slow and peaceful. Power down weapons and extend docking tubes. Dr. Rivers, you're with me." The first alien vessel they approached was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Valiant. Its bioorganic hull pulsed with fading bioluminescent patterns, like a dying heartbeat made visible. The docking was awkward. Human technology was never designed to interface with living ships. When the airlock finally opened, Admiral Stone got his first look at the beings who had called across the galaxy for help. They were tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and translucent blue skin that seemed to glow from within. Their faces were angular but somehow serene, dominated by large eyes that contained dozens of faceted surfaces like jewels. The alien who greeted them moved with obvious pain, favoring one side where his translucent skin showed darker patches that might have been injuries. When he spoke, his voice was a harmony of musical tones that seemed to resonate in the humans' chests. "You came," the alien said in halting English. We did not believe you would come." Dr. Rivers stepped forward, her training taking over, despite the magnitude of the moment. "I'm Dr. Amanda Rivers. This is Admiral Michael Stone. We received your distress call. We're here to help." The alien's large eyes studied them with an expression that was difficult to read. "I am Elder Kieran, of the Karathi. We have waited and hoped, but..." He paused, and the bioluminescent patterns on his skin shifted to deeper, more subdued colors. You are not what we expected. Admiral Stone frowned. What did you expect? Elder Kieran gestured with one long arm toward a viewing portal where the human fleet hung in space like angular metal predators. We have listened to your broadcasts for many cycles. Your music speaks of beauty and peace. Your stories tell of wisdom and compassion. We thought... He trailed off, his harmonious voice taking on a note that sounded almost like fear. We thought you would be like us. The Karathi led them through corridors that seemed to pulse with life. Everything was curved and flowing, with surfaces that responded to touch by glowing softly. It was more like walking through the inside of some vast organism than a spaceship. Other Karathi watched the humans pass, their faceted eyes tracking every movement. Children, smaller versions with brighter skin patterns, peered out from alcoves, before quickly hiding. The fear was palpable. In the central chamber of the ship, Elder Kieran showed them recordings of the attack. The images were transmitted directly into their minds somehow, allowing them to experience the battle from the Karathi perspective. The attackers were insectoid creatures with chitinous armor and multiple limbs. They moved with mechanical precision, their ships firing coherent energy beams that sliced through Karathi vessels like knives through silk. But what struck the humans most was how clean the battle was, almost ritual in its formality. The hegemony, Elder Kieran explained. They have ruled this part of the galaxy for 1,000 of your years. They conquer worlds, enslave populations, eliminate those who resist. We tried to run, but they followed us here. Admiral Stone studied the tactical data. The Karathi had been outnumbered 10-1, but their technology seemed advanced. Why? Didn't you fight back? Elder Kieran's skin patterns shifted to what might have been confusion. Fight back? We are not warriors, Admiral Stone. We are gardeners, artists, philosophers. We create beauty. We do not destroy. But surely you have weapons, defenses. We have tools for mining asteroids, for clearing space debris. But to turn them against other living beings. The alien shuddered, his musical voice taking on harmonies that suggested deep distress. We cannot. It is not in our nature. Dr. Rivers leaned forward. That's why you called for help. You were looking for someone who could fight. We listened to your world's transmissions, Elder Kieran said. We heard your music, your poetry, your stories of heroes who sacrificed themselves for others. We thought you had evolved beyond violence, that you had found wisdom we lacked. He gestured to Admiral Stone's military uniform, to the sidearm at his hip, to the angular warships visible through the portal. But you bring weapons, your ships are built for war, you are... He struggled to find the words in English. You are predators. The accusation hung in the air between them. Admiral Stone felt the weight of 40 light-years of travel, of humanity's hopes and fears pressing down on him. These beings had called for help, but they were terrified of the help that had arrived. Elder Kieran, he said carefully, we are not predators. We are protectors. What is the difference? The alien asked. Before Admiral Stone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the Karathi ship. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls shifted to urgent reds and oranges. Elder Kieran's eyes widened in terror. They have returned, he whispered. The hegemony has found us again. Through the viewing portal, new ships began dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Dozens of them, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. They moved with the same mechanical precision the humans had seen in the recordings, taking position around the surviving Karathi vessels like hunters surrounding wounded prey. Admiral Stone activated his communicator. All ships' battle stations prepare for combat. Elder Kieran grabbed his arm with surprising strength. You cannot fight them. They are too many, too strong. We must run. Stone gently but firmly removed the alien's hand from his arm. Elder Kieran, you called across the galaxy for help. This is what help looks like. As he strode toward the airlock, Dr. Rivers hurried after him. Admiral, he's right. We're outnumbered 5-1. This could be suicide. Stone paused at the threshold between the alien ship and his own. Through the docking tube, he could see his crew preparing for battle. Humans who had traveled 2 years through the void to answer a call for help from beings they had never met. "Doctor," he said quietly, "sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Those aliens out there think the Karathi belong to them. They're about to learn that nobody belongs to anybody." He sealed his helmet and stepped back into the Valiant. Behind him, Elder Kieran watched through the portal as the human fleet moved to intercept the hegemony vessels. The Karathi's large eyes reflected the running lights of the warships, and for the first time since humanity had arrived, his bioluminescent patterns showed something other than fear. They showed hope. War Prime Sec studied the new arrivals through the sensor feeds of his flagship. The unknown vessels were primitive by hegemony standards, crude metal constructions that leaked heat and radiation like wounded animals. Their design spoke of a violent, unrefined species that had barely mastered the basics of space travel. "Scan complete, War Prime," his subordinate reported through the clicking harmony of their shared language. 6 vessels, inferior technology, minimal threat assessment. They appear to be some form of rescue attempt. Sek's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. In 300 cycles of conquest, he had seen many species attempt to save the Karathi. Most fled after a demonstration of hegemony power. The few that stayed were efficiently eliminated according to the established protocols of war. "Standard, dispersal pattern," he commanded. "Eliminate the interlopers, then complete harvest of the remaining Karathi vessels." The hegemony fleet moved with mechanical precision, each ship taking its assigned position in a formation that had been perfected. Over centuries of conquest, they would surround the primitive newcomers, demand surrender, and when that failed, demonstrate why resistance to the hegemony was futile. What happened next violated every principle of civilized warfare that Sec had ever learned. Instead of forming defensive positions or attempting to negotiate, the human ships accelerated directly toward the hegemony fleet at maximum burn. They came in a ragged line, their engines flaring like tiny suns, broadcasting something on multiple frequencies that took Sec's translators a moment to process. It was music. Strange, rhythmic sounds with underlying harmonies that seemed to speak of both sorrow and defiance. The humans were singing as they charged into battle. The first human ship reached the hegemony formation and did something that shocked Sec to his core. Instead of firing energy weapons from a respectful distance, it launched primitive kinetic projectiles. Actual chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The crude missiles tore through the elegant hull of a hegemony, cruiser like rocks through paper. Atmosphere vented into space, carrying with it the broken bodies of Sec's warriors. The beauty of the ship's design, refined over centuries of aesthetic evolution, was ruined in seconds by brute force and ignorance. "Return fire," Sec commanded, his harmonious voice taking on overtones of rage. "Teach these primitives the cost of defying the hegemony." The hegemony weapons were works of art, precisely calibrated energy beams that could slice through armor plating without damaging the valuable machinery beneath. They were designed for conquest, not destruction, allowing the hegemony to capture intact vessels and technologies, but the humans seemed uninterested in preserving anything. When one of their destroyers took a direct hit from a particle beam, punching through its hull and venting half its atmosphere, the ship did not retreat or attempt repairs. Instead, it accelerated harder, diving directly into the formation of hegemony vessels while its crew worked frantically to seal breaches and maintain life support. The damaged human ship collided with a hegemony battleship at significant velocity. Both vessels vanished in a sphere of nuclear fire that painted the surrounding space with radiation and debris. Sec stared at the expanding cloud of destruction in disbelief. The humans had deliberately sacrificed their ship and crew to eliminate a single enemy vessel. It was wasteful, primitive, and utterly irrational. It was also terrifyingly effective. The second human destroyer was caught between 2 hegemony vessels and subjected to crossfire that should have disabled it within minutes. Instead of surrendering or retreating, the human crew sealed themselves into the ship's central core, and continued fighting even as their outer hull was systematically destroyed around them. When their main weapons were disabled, they fired their escape pods at enemy ships, not to evacuate but as improvised missiles. When their engines were damaged, they used controlled detonations to alter their course. When their hull was breached in dozens of places, they kept fighting from whatever compartment still held atmosphere. The ship finally died when its fusion reactor was breached, but not before launching every missile in its inventory at point-blank range into a hegemony command vessel. Both ships vanished in another brilliant flash of nuclear fire. "What manner of beings are these?" whispered one of Sek's officers, his clicking harmonies tight with fear. Sek had no answer. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a species that treated death in battle as acceptable, even preferable, if it served their cause. The humans fought like they were already dead, like nothing they could lose was more valuable than the destruction of their enemies. The third human ship, a massive cruiser, was surrounded by 5 hegemony vessels and subjected to concentrated fire from all directions. Its hull glowed cherry red from absorbed energy, and massive sections of its superstructure peeled away like burning skin. But instead of dying quietly, the human ship began broadcasting on all frequencies. Not a surrender, not a plea for mercy, but what Sek's translators identified as poetry. The humans were reciting verses about honor and sacrifice, while their ship disintegrated around them. When the cruiser's hull finally buckled and atmosphere began venting from a dozen breaches, the humans made one last gesture of defiance. They ejected their fusion cores on a collision course with the nearest hegemony vessel, then used their remaining maneuvering thrusters to ram a second ship, while their own vessel came apart at the seams. 3 more hegemony ships vanished in the resulting explosions. Aboard the surviving Karathi vessels, Elder Kiran and his people watched the battle through their bioorganic sensors with growing horror and fascination. The humans fought like no species they had ever imagined, not with the clinical precision of the hegemony, but with a wild, desperate ferocity that seemed to embrace death as readily as victory. "They are destroying themselves to protect us," whispered one young Karathi, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with confusion. "Why would they do such a thing? They barely know us." Elder Kiran had no answer. The human concept of dying for strangers was as alien to the Karathi as it was to the hegemony. Both species valued life above all else. The Karathi because they cherished beauty and growth, the hegemony because they needed living beings to serve their empire. But the humans seemed to value something else entirely, something they were willing to die for without hesitation. The battle continued for 2 more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The human fleet was outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a tactical brilliance born of desperation. They used the debris from their own destroyed ships as cover, turned asteroid fields into ambush points, and employed strategies that seemed to prioritize psychological impact over military efficiency. When the last human ship finally died, taking 3 more hegemony vessels with it, War Prime Sek found himself staring at a tactical situation that should have been impossible. His fleet had won the battle, but at a cost that made victory feel like defeat. 12 hegemony vessels destroyed, hundreds of warriors dead, all to eliminate 6 primitive ships that should have been swept aside in minutes. War Prime, his communications officer reported, "We are receiving a transmission from the surviving Karathi vessels. Put it through." Elder Kiran's musical voice filled the bridge of the hegemony flagship, but his harmonies had changed. Where once there had been fear and despair, now there was something else, something that made Sek's chitinous skin crawl. War Prime. "Sek of the hegemony," the Karathi said, "you have won this battle, but at what cost? The humans came 40 light years to answer our call for help. They died to protect beings they had never met, asking nothing in return." Sek's mandibles clicked nervously. "They were primitives. Their deaths mean nothing." "Do they?" Elder Kiran asked. "Your own warriors are wondering why the humans fought so hard for strangers. They are asking questions about honor and sacrifice that you cannot answer. How long before they begin to ask why they serve an empire that offers them nothing but conquest and death?" War Prime Sec cut the transmission, but Elder Kieran's words echoed in his mind. Around him, his bridge crew worked with their usual efficiency, but he could sense the uncertainty in their movements. They had won the battle, but somehow the humans had planted a seed of doubt that threatened to grow into something far more dangerous than any weapon. The hegemony had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for 1,000 years, but today, they had encountered something they could not understand. A species that feared nothing because they believed in something greater than themselves. Sec gave the order to withdraw, leaving the surviving Karathi vessels behind. He told himself it was a tactical decision, that the cost of eliminating the remaining aliens was too high. But deep in his mind, he knew the truth. For the first time in his long career of conquest, War Prime Sec was afraid. The rescue ship UES Mercy arrived 3 days after the battle, finding only debris and survivors. Dr. Amanda Rivers floated in the medical bay of the Karathi vessel, working frantically to save alien lives with equipment never designed for non-human anatomy. Her hands were stained with blue Karathi blood, and exhaustion made her movements clumsy, but she refused to rest. Elder Kieran watched her work with growing confusion. The human doctor had been awake for 60 hours straight, using crude surgical techniques that should have killed her patients but somehow kept them alive. She had torn apart her own medical equipment to create improvised devices that could interface with Karathi biology. "Why?" he asked finally, his musical voice soft with wonder. Dr. Rivers looked up from her patient, a young Karathi whose bioluminescent patterns were barely flickering. "Why what? Why do you exhaust yourself saving us? Your people are dead. Your ships are destroyed. You gain nothing from our survival." She returned to her work, her hands steady despite her fatigue. "Because you're alive and I can help. That's enough." It was not enough for Elder Kieran. Nothing about humanity made sense to him. After the battle, his people had accessed human information networks through their communication systems, learning about the species that had come so far to help them. What they had found horrified them. Humans had been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. They had developed thousands of ways to kill each other, had poisoned their own world with industrial waste, had committed acts of genocide that made the hegemony look restrained. Their military history read like a catalog of nightmares. Weapons designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum suffering. Yet these same creatures had traveled 40 light years to answer a call for help from strangers. Admiral Michael Stone was dead, killed when his flagship was destroyed in the final moments of the battle, but the human survivors seemed unconcerned about their losses. They worked with quiet efficiency to help the Karathi repair their ships, sharing technology and resources without hesitation. Commander Beth Harper, the senior surviving human officer, found Elder Kieran in the ship's central garden, a vast chamber filled with bioluminescent plants that pulsed with soft, shifting colors. The Karathi leader was tending to a flowering tree that had been damaged in the battle, his long fingers carefully supporting broken branches. "Elder Kieran," she said, her voice respectful but firm. "We need to talk." He did not look up from his work. "I know what you wish to discuss, Commander Harper. You want to know why we fear you now that you have saved us." Harper settled beside him, watching as he worked. The tree was beautiful, its translucent bark glowing with internal light, its flowers shifting through spectrums of color that human eyes could barely perceive. "My people studied your databases," Kieran continued. "We learned about your wars, your weapons, your history of violence. We know what you are capable of." "Do you?" Harper asked quietly. Kieran finally looked at her, his faceted eyes reflecting the garden's bioluminescent glow. "You are apex predators. Your entire evolution was shaped by conflict and competition. You have turned killing into an art form, refined it across millennia of warfare." Harper nodded slowly. "All of that is true, but you're missing something important." "What am I missing?" "You're assuming that our capacity for violence makes us evil. But that's not how it works." Harper gestured to the damaged tree between them. This plant, it's beautiful, peaceful, but I bet it has thorns or produces toxins or has some way to defend itself. Of course, all life must have defenses. And that makes it evil? Kieran's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that suggested confusion. That is different. Plants defend themselves from predators. They do not wage war for conquest or sport. Neither do we, Harper said firmly. Elder Kieran, yes, humans, are violent. Yes, we've fought wars and done terrible things, but we've also spent thousands of years learning to control that violence, to direct it toward protection rather than aggression. She stood and walked to the viewing portal, where the debris of the battle still drifted in space. Those ships, out there, they weren't crewed by monsters or madmen. They were crewed by people who volunteered to risk everything to help strangers. Teachers, engineers, parents, ordinary people who believed that protecting others was worth dying for. But the violence, Kieran protested, the way your people fought, it was savage, terrifying. It was effective, Harper corrected. Elder, Kieran, your people are gardeners and artists, you create beauty. But someone has to protect the gardens from those who would destroy them. She turned back to face him, her expression serious. You called across the galaxy for help because you couldn't fight the hegemony yourselves, not because you lacked the technology, but because violence goes against your nature. That's beautiful and we respect it. But it also makes you vulnerable. Kieran's patterns shifted again, this time to deeper blues that might have indicated sadness or contemplation. So you become monsters, so that we do not have to. We become whatever is necessary, Harper said simply. That's what makes us human. Meanwhile, in the deep space between star systems, War Prime Sec's retreating fleet struggled with questions they had never faced before. The hegemony had ruled through simple principles. Might makes right. The strong command the weak. Resistance is futile. But the humans had shattered those principles through their incomprehensible willingness to die for others. Sec stood in his command chamber, studying reports from across the hegemony. Word of the human sacrifice was spreading, carried by survivors and witnesses. Subject species that had accepted their fate for centuries were beginning to ask dangerous questions. If 6 primitive ships could inflict such damage on the mighty hegemony fleet, what could a coordinated resistance accomplish? If unknown aliens would travel 40 light-years to help strangers, why did conquered peoples accept oppression without resistance? War Prime, his intelligence officer reported, we have confirmation that 17 colonial systems have experienced unrest in the past cycle. Nothing organized yet, but the pattern is spreading. Sec's mandibles clicked nervously. The humans had been dead for days, but their influence continued to grow like a virus, infecting the Empire's carefully maintained order. Increase patrols. In all systems, he commanded. Any sign of rebellion is to be crushed immediately. But privately, Sec wondered if it was already too late. The humans had done something that centuries of conquest had never achieved. They had made the hegemony's subjects believe that resistance was possible. Back aboard the Karathi vessel, Dr. Rivers finally collapsed from exhaustion after saving her 15th patient. Elder Kieran found her sleeping in the medical bay, her head pillowed on a stack of alien medical texts she had been trying to translate. He studied her face as she slept, so different from Karathi features, with its small eyes and rigid bone structure. She looked fragile, almost childlike in repose. It was hard to believe that she belonged to the same species as the warriors who had died so violently to protect his people. But perhaps that was the point. Humans contained multitudes, the capacity for extreme violence and extreme compassion existing side by side in the same beings. They could wage war with terrifying efficiency and then risk their lives to heal their enemies. They were walking contradictions, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. For the first time since humanity had answered their call for help, Elder Kieran began to understand what they truly were. Not monsters or angels, but something far more complex and ultimately more alien than any species the galaxy had ever known. They were gardeners who had learned to fight, artists who had mastered the art of war, philosophers who understood that sometimes philosophy must be defended with violence. They had evolved not beyond their violent nature, but beyond the luxury of avoiding it. As Dr. Rivers slept, her hands still stained with alien blood from her efforts to heal, Elder Kieran made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. The Karathi would stand with humanity, not because they understood them, but because they finally understood what humanity represented. Hope. Terrible, uncompromising hope that refused to accept the darkness, no matter what the cost. The message Elder Kieran composed that night would travel to every corner of the galaxy, carrying with it the story of 6 human ships and their impossible sacrifice. It would speak of a species that had learned to wage war not for conquest, but for protection. Not for glory, but for love. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity truly was. War Prime Sec was right to be afraid. 6 months after the first human fleet died protecting strangers, a second armada arrived at the edge of Karathi space. But this time, humanity had not come alone. The fleet that dropped out of faster-than-light travel was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human warships flew alongside Karathi biovessels, their angular metal hulls complemented by organic curves that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Other species had joined them. The crystalline Zentari who communicated through light, the gas giant dwellers called the Nephilim, whose ships looked like captured storms. Admiral Lisa Park commanded the combined fleet from the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. She had volunteered for the mission after reading the reports of Admiral Stone's sacrifice, leaving behind a comfortable position in Earth's orbital defense fleet for the chance to honor the dead. Admiral, her communications officer reported, "We're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony fleet. They want to parley." Park studied the tactical display showing the massive Hegemony force waiting in the system's outer reaches. 2,000 ships representing the largest military concentration in the Empire's history. War Prime Sec had learned from his previous encounter with humanity and come prepared for total war. "Put him through," Park ordered. War Prime Sec's chitinous features filled the main screen, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "So the humans return, bringing their tame aliens with them. Do you truly believe this ragtag alliance can stand against the might of the Hegemony?" "I believe," Park replied calmly, "that you're about to find out." The battle for the Ariana system began at dawn on the 3rd day, when the human vanguard engaged the Hegemony's forward scouts near the system's asteroid belt. But this time, the humans did not charge blindly into enemy fire. They had learned from their first encounter, adapting their tactics while keeping the fierce determination that had shocked the galaxy. Commander Val Roberts led the opening assault from her destroyer UES Retribution. Instead of the suicidal frontal attacks that had characterized the first battle, the human ships used the asteroid field as cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts among the floating rocks. They struck fast and hard, then vanished before the Hegemony could bring their superior firepower to bear. "They fight differently now," observed Subprime Kex from the bridge of Sec's flagship. "More controlled, more strategic." War Prime Sec watched his scouts fall one by one to the human hit-and-run tactics. They learned quickly, too quickly. The Karathi vessels hung back from the initial engagement, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with nervous energy. Elder Kieran had insisted that his people would fight alongside their human allies, despite their peaceful nature. But when the moment came to fire weapons at living beings, many Karathi crews found themselves paralyzed by their own compassion. "I cannot do it," whispered the captain of the Karathi vessel Harmony's End, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with distress. "They are living beings, even if they are our enemies." "Then do not aim at their ships," suggested Dr. Rivers, who had remained with the Karathi fleet as a liaison. "Aim at their weapons, their engines. Disable them without killing." It was a compromise that allowed the Karathi to participate without violating their deepest beliefs. Their precise bioenergy weapons began targeting Hegemony ship systems, crippling vessels without destroying them entirely. The main battle began when Admiral Park brought her full fleet out of the gas giant's shadow, where they had been hiding. The sight that greeted the Hegemony was unlike anything they had prepared for. Not just human warships, but a true alliance of species fighting as one coordinated force. The Zentari ships moved like liquid light, their crystalline hulls refracting energy beams and redirecting them back at their attackers. The Nephilim vessels drifted through space like living clouds, their storm-based weapons creating electromagnetic chaos that disrupted hegemony targeting systems. But it was still the humans who formed the core of the attack, and they fought with the same terrifying dedication that had characterized their first encounter with the hegemony. The difference was that now they fought as part of something larger than themselves. When the destroyer UES Courage took critical damage instead of ramming the nearest enemy ship, its crew coordinated with a Karathi bio-vessel to transfer their remaining ammunition before evacuating. The Karathi ship used the human weapons with devastating effect, while the human crew was safely extracted by a Zentari rescue craft. War Prime Sec watched the coordinated assault with growing alarm. The humans had not just survived their first encounter with the hegemony. They had learned from it, adapted, and somehow convinced other species to join their cause. How did they do it? He asked his intelligence officer. How did they turn peaceful species into warriors? They did not turn them into warriors, War Prime, the officer replied after consulting his data feeds. They convinced them that some things are worth fighting for. The battle raged for 18 hours with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The hegemony had superior numbers and firepower, but the alliance fought with a flexibility and coordination that the rigid hegemony formations could not match. The turning point came when a group of hegemony boarding parties managed to capture one of the Karathi bioships. The elegant vessel's crew was taken prisoner, their luminescent patterns flickering with terror as they faced the chitinous soldiers who had destroyed so many of their colonies. Admiral Park received the distress signal and made a decision that would echo through history. Instead of writing off the captured vessel as a casualty of war, she ordered an immediate rescue attempt. "Admiral, that's suicide," protested her tactical officer. "The ship is surrounded by hegemony vessels. We'll lose half the fleet trying to save one Karathi ship." "No," Park replied firmly. "We'll lose our souls if we abandon them." The rescue fleet that converged on the captured bioship included vessels from every species in the Alliance. Human destroyers provided covering fire while Zentari ships used their light-based weapons to blind enemy sensors. Nephilim vessels created storm barriers to protect the rescue craft, while Karathi ships sang mournful harmonies that somehow boosted the morale of their allies. Commander Beth Harper led the boarding party that fought its way through the captured bioship, deck by deck, to reach the Karathi prisoners. The fighting was brutal in close quarters, with human soldiers using their combat training to overcome hegemony troops in the narrow corridors of the alien vessel. When Harper finally reached the prisoners, she found Elder Kieran among them, his luminescent patterns dim with pain and exhaustion. "Commander Harper," he said weakly, "you should not have come. Too many will die for too few." "Elder," Harper replied as she cut his bonds, "that's exactly why we came. The rescue operation cost the Alliance 3 ships and over 200 lives, but every Karathi prisoner was safely extracted, and the sight of different species dying to save each other had an effect that no military victory could have achieved." Across the hegemony fleet, soldiers who had spent their lives conquering others watched aliens sacrifice themselves for beings they had known for mere months. The rigid hierarchy that had held the Empire together for centuries began to crack as individual crews started questioning orders. War Prime, one of Sec's ship captains, reported, "My crew is requesting permission to withdraw from the battle. They say they no longer understand what we are fighting for." It was the beginning of the end. As word of the rescue spread through both fleets, more hegemony ships began standing down. Some crews mutinied against their officers. Others simply powered down their weapons and waited for the battle to end. War Prime Sec found himself commanding a disintegrating fleet, watching centuries of imperial discipline collapse in the face of an enemy that fought not for conquest, but for ideals his people could barely comprehend. The final moment came when a young hegemony soldier, barely out of training, sent a message across all frequencies. His clicking, harmonious voice carried a simple question that shattered the last of the Empire's resolve. "Why do the humans fight harder to save their enemies than we fight to serve our masters?" Sec had no answer. He gave the order to withdraw, but fewer than half his ships obeyed. The rest remained in the system, their crews requesting asylum or simply declaring their independence from an empire they no longer believed in. The battle was over, but the real victory had happened in the hearts and minds of beings across the galaxy, the impossible sight of different species working together, sacrificing for each other, protecting each other, had planted seeds that would grow into something the hegemony could never defeat. In the days that followed, Admiral Park received delegations from dozens of species that had heard the story of the battle. They came not seeking conquest or trade, but alliance. They wanted to be part of something that valued life over power, cooperation over domination. Elder Kieran found Admiral Park in the observation deck of the Defiance, watching the stars beyond the battlefield. The space around them was filled with ships from a dozen different species, all working together to rescue survivors and repair damage. "Admiral," he said, his bioluminescent patterns now bright with health and hope, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "When we first called for help, we were looking for saviors, wise, peaceful beings who could solve our problems without violence. Instead, we found humans." Park smiled. "I'm sorry we disappointed you." "You did not disappoint us," Kieran replied. "You exceeded our wildest dreams. We asked for salvation and you gave us something better. You gave us hope." He gestured to the mixed fleet outside, where human engineers worked alongside Karathi biotechnicians, where Zentari lightshapers collaborated with Nephilim stormcallers. "You showed us that the universe does not have to be divided between predators and prey, that there is a third option, guardians who choose to protect rather than conquer." Admiral Park nodded, understanding finally dawning. "That's what we are, isn't it? Not the strongest or the wisest or the most advanced, just the ones willing to stand between the darkness and the light." "Yes," Elder Kieran agreed. "And now, thanks to you, we are no longer alone in that choice." The message that went out from the Ariana system that day would reshape the galaxy. It spoke of an alliance built not on conquest or fear, but on the radical idea that all life was worth protecting. It told the story of humans who had learned to wage war not for glory but for love. The hegemony would never recover from what happened at Ariana, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were shown a better way to live. One by one, their subject species would choose freedom over servitude, cooperation over domination, and at the center of it all would be humanity, not as conquerors or rulers, but as the guardians they had always been meant to be. The species that had learned to fight so that others might not have to. War Prime Sec, in his final report to the collapsing hegemony high command, would write, "We were not defeated by superior weapons or numbers. We were defeated by an idea. The idea that strength exists to protect weakness. That power serves purpose only when it serves others. The humans did not destroy us. They simply showed us what we could become. The galaxy had called for salvation and received something better, transformation. And it all began with 6 ships and their impossible crew, willing to die for strangers 40 light-years from home.